Hello, my fellow Americans. I'm Bill Lipinski, and this is Two Guys on Politics. And next up is our home run hitter, the one and only, the best commentator I've ever run into, Mr. Ray Hanania.
Thanks, Bill. You're a good guy. I really appreciate it. This is Ray Hanania, and this is Two Guys on Politics, February 13, 2025, Season 4, Episode 5. Where we have one major focus today. We may come up with a few other topics, but right now it's the strange way that our president is addressing the conflict between the new Soviet Union and Vladimir Putin and Ukraine. It's troublesome. It's worrisome. I think this is going to cause him. I don't think he realizes how much trouble this issue is going to cause him, even among some of his supporters. Even though I know that he was always touting how he could bring the war to an end, it doesn't sound like it's going to be a good end. What do you think of what you've heard so far, Bill?
Well, so at first of all, what I heard was that he was going to meet with Putin in Saudi Arabia. Now, I'm not quite sure why it was in Saudi Arabia, but the two of them were going to meet there, and they were going to discuss the war in Ukraine, the war between the Russians and the Ukrainians.
Right.
All he wanted to do was to find peace, because he hates to see all these people being killed on the Russian side and on the Ukrainian side. So he's going to sit down there. He's going to meet with Putin. I guess what is the name of the gentleman?
Mohammed bin Salman, the prince of Saudi Arabia under the king. And the Saudis have had good relations with the Trump administration.
Oh, yeah.
And somewhat with the Biden administration, but I think more so with Trump.
Yeah, I guess the prince was going to be somewhat of a moderator and sort of represent the Ukrainians. Well, unfortunately for Trumper, the Ukrainian President Zelensky has decided that, no, he's not going to be cut out of the negotiations over a peace for his country. So he says there'll be no kind of deal whatsoever unless he is sitting at the table with Putin and the prince and our great president, Donald Trump, which throws a fly in the ointment of what Trump had in the first place. Trump has talked like, and his Secretary of State has talked like, the Ukrainians are simply going to have to give up 18% of their country that is now occupied by the Russians. The Russians wanted their naval post back, their naval port back. It's the only warm weather port they have, the Russians. They would get that back because they now occupy that. There's some other city that means a great deal to the Russians and to the Ukrainians. They would get that back because they occupy it. Now, I'd like to know, actually, the Ukrainians occupy some Russian territory.
Currently, now, right, that they took during the war.
Yeah. Will the Russians get that back, or does that stay with the Ukrainians? Well, I mean, there's an awful lot of questions that have to be answered here, and I just don't know. Of course, unfortunately for the Ukrainians, the United States of America has given them $65 billion.
Right.
And Trump says he's not giving any more money unless he gets a full audit of the $65 billion. Now, if you remember, Ray, before this war started, the Ukrainian government was not considered one of the most honest governments. There was a lot of corruption. But
was it prior? It was prior to Zelensky, though, wasn't it? Most of the alleged corruption and stuff that took place.
The alleged corruption, but there was still some corruption dealing with Zelensky's government also. I know his wife left the Ukraine with their children shortly after the war started, and living in Paris now.
Right.
And I hate to say this, But the fact of the matter is, she's driving around Paris in a Lamborghini. So either he was paid very well as an actor or as president of the Ukraine, or she was making money on the side. But that's an awfully expensive car. And even if it was perfectly legit that they paid for it with their own money, it certainly doesn't look good. So those are two of the things that Trump is throwing at the Ukrainians. And let's face it, Trump likes people who are strong people. He likes Putin. He's always liked Putin through the first years of his administration and through all the years of the Biden administration. He always thinks he can handle Putin. But now you take the floor. Those are some of the thoughts I have to say right now.
Yeah, no, I've heard a lot of that. The Lamborghini thing I heard was more of a loaner, not that they owned it. But, you can't trust the media or Russian propaganda about what's happening. And if I were Zelensky, knowing that the Russians are bombing my cities, I would move my family out, because taking out the family of the president would be like defeating Ukraine. So by hurting Zelensky's family, it would have been a huge win, for the Russians. So that doesn't bother me at most. But what does bother me is that President Trump has no sense of planning. He shoots from his hip. He just says stuff that makes no sense. I think, because of the loyalty of his supporters, and remember, he got a lot of people who they didn't vote for him. They voted against Biden. That's a huge group of voters.
Oh,
he has this mandate, and I think that of all the issues that he's dealing with, I think his handling, which I think is mishandling of Ukraine, could undermine him and cause a rebellion against him. It certainly could weaken him, because Putin is a communist terrorist, in my view. He hates the West. He hates the United States. He sees that Trump is naive and, doesn't understand international politics. So Putin feels like he's won the war, because of a president who's acting more like a quisling than a leader who cares about the West and the United States. Now, some people listening might say, well, that's your fault for voting for Trump. No, I didn't vote for Trump. I voted against Biden. The Democrats are the ones that elected Trump by having stupid policies, not having a strong enough candidate. And it was Biden whose weakness sent a very subtle signal that very smart Vladimir Putin, as much as I see him as a threat, saw that as an opportunity to invade the Ukraine, because he didn't believe Biden would do anything. And he was right. And by the time we started to do something, the war had gotten really terrible. So I don't think, that Biden looks good in this at all. But I really think that Trump, his missteps on a lot of international issues, I think are going to undermine him. Now, I'm not sure what form that takes, but I think that, there are going to be a lot of Americans that are going to be upset that this communist tyrant who murdered civilians, who bombed cities, why wouldn't he do that to Germany? Why wouldn't he do it to Poland? Why wouldn't he do it to all these other European countries to destroy NATO, especially using President Trump's own destructive words, saying that we should get out of NATO? I think the best thing that could happen to democracy is if the U.S. got out of NATO and NATO started acting independent of the U.S. and invited Ukraine to become a member. I'd like to see, what would the United States do? Would we partner with Russia and bomb the Western Europe?
No.
Well, I mean, we say that now, but we don't know how crazy our international politics has become.
No, I just got the solution for this Ukrainian situation. Buy Ukraine.
We'll buy it. Yeah, listen. You raised some legitimate points about, Ukraine wasn't the best country in the world. There were controversies, but don't you think? I mean, deep down, if I really think, why is he so against Ukraine? It's because Hunter Biden had business with Ukraine when his father was vice president and president, and a Trump who's more of a baby than a leader sometimes is upset that nobody ever hammered that issue away. And I think this is his way of like getting even, with Ukraine because of his view that they supported Biden over him.
Well, you have to take it. Now, I'm with the Ukrainians.
Me too.
I feel sorry for them. I've flown a Ukrainian flag almost every day since this war started out in front of my house. So I'm definitely with them.
Yes.
I know they didn't have the best government in Europe, but it was a lot better than they'll have underneath the Russians. There's no question about that.
That's for sure.
But I think one of the biggest mistakes that was made was that I don't remember who it was, but there was someone I believe it was in the Obama administration, at some meeting with Putin, promised Putin that the Ukrainians would never be admitted to what do you call it? NATO. Okay. They also told him that there would be no expansion of NATO east of Germany. Well,
right.
after Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania all came into NATO. Poland came into NATO. In the people in the Ukraine were talking about it. So he was getting concerned more and more. He was going to have NATO right up to his border. Now,
right.
what I used to say about that situation was, well, ask him to join. Have him
Yeah.
become NATO also. That way we can all be together. We don't have to fear one another. And, maybe it'll soften up the Russians. Maybe they'll eventually, through some miracle, become an absolutely, civil democratic society. It would have been worth the risk. As it turns out, this hasn't worked out very well at all.
Well, I think Obama certainly he messed up in 2014 when his reaction to the Russian invasion of Crimea, which was part of Ukraine, was basically to do nothing. He
Oh, yeah.
did nothing. And he sent the first signal to not Trump, not Biden, but Obama that the Soviets were still a power and that we had to be very careful with what they were doing. Both the U.S., I guess, and the European Union imposed sanctions on Russia and Kremlin Ukrainian officials after they illegally annexed the Crimea, but they faced criticism for doing nothing more. So and then of course you heard probably this week, or was it recently, that Obama started defending his policy, saying, "Oh, that was a different context." I don't think it was a different context. I think Obama did a poor job, and maybe we have to go back and blame him for this crisis. That we should have stopped Russia at the Crimea instead of giving them the sense that they could just move ahead and take what they wanted.
Well, I think that the further and further we get away from the Obama presidency, and the more objective we look at it,
Yes.
the more and more mistakes we see that his administration made, not
Yes.
only in the Middle East, but in Europe. And it's very, very unfortunate, but it happened. But no one said anything about it at the time because, he was the Messiah.
Right.
He was a
Well,
very smart man, but that's not always the best person to have out there leading things.
there are a lot of people in America that feel better when they hear nice words that are well spoken, and ignore the facts of the reality of what's taking place on the ground. Obama had a great way of making uh, tartar taste like honey, and by the way he spoke, and he could make anything ugly look really good. And of course, he had the shield of racism that was imposed on everybody. Anybody who criticized him was a racist. That every time he tried to raise an issue, you wanted to criticize him. They talked about, oh, that's the old white racism coming up. We could never get into a real issue with him because we had to pull our punches, worried that, oh, this is going to turn into a racial fight rather than a substantive fight about the fact that Obama wasn't a very good president.
No, he was.
He was the one the media loved his quotes. He gave them great stories, but he did nothing. His promises to the Arab world, he lied. He did nothing. And all this talk about how he was going to do great things. So he set up a bad situation, and it just got worse. And I think I think that we could have done a lot better. And if it just the Bidens, who I believe were under the influence of the Obamas and the Clintons. And I think that was always part of the problem, too. I think the Biden policies reflected the Obama policies. And I think some of the, Trump calls it the swamp. But actually, I shouldn't say that. There are a lot of people that call Washington, D.C. the swamp.
Right.
They got alligators and monsters in the water who are bureaucrats.
Anybody that's out of power in Washington calls Washington the swamp. When they get in power, it's not so bad.
Well, of course. But so,
But Ray, say that you are Zelensky at the present time. And Trump says, here's the deal. We're going to stop the war. The Russians get 18% of the territory of the Ukraine, which they now occupy. You can have the 5 or 6% of Russia that you occupy, but the war is over. This is it. And in order to do that, I want you to know that the United States of America is not going to fund you any longer. So if you want to continue this fight and you can find some wealthy allies to back you up, you go right ahead, but we're finished.
Well, here's the reality of that. Trump is basically saying he's not going to give the Ukraine any money, regardless of what he does. Right. If I were Zelensky, I would stand up and say this is about democracy, standing up to the communists. Sure, we had our problems, but we're working closely with the West to be a better nation, and we want to join NATO. And if Trump wants to surrender to Vladimir Putin, I think he needs to really be tough on Trump. That if Trump wants to, and the United States want to surrender and show weakness by surrendering to Putin, they can do that. But he will fight for what's right and democracy, and they will keep defending their lands, whether it's 82% or the 100%. And that doesn't even include the Crimea. If I were him, I'd declare that we're going to take the Crimea back. And then I would have under, secret units that I would send into Russia, and I'd wreak havoc that way. I think Zelensky has to recognize the reality at this point that the United States, because of our president, is not going to be a reliable defender of democracy. And he's going to have to do this on his own. And I feel kind of ashamed, that's what we've come to.
You think that he can get to NATO to support him?
I think that NATO would support him, especially if the U.S. backing out allows the Russians to advance further into Ukraine. Because if they take Ukraine, they could take every European country. And I think that Zelensky needs to say that if you allow him to take the Ukraine, every European country will be subject. Maybe not today. How long did it take for him to go into Crimea? How long did it take then, 10 years later, or actually 8 years later, he invades Ukraine. So I think that he can make a good argument that by not standing up today, you will be undermining your future. And I think that scares a lot of people in Europe because Vladimir Putin is a sick person. He's not a good person.
You know what the population is of all the NATO countries put together?
No, I don't. I don't.
It's 850 million people.
Wow.
The United States is 350 million. Okay,
Right.
so NATO is about two and a half times the population of NATO is two and a half times larger than the United States.
Right.
Why why can't they come up with more money, more armaments for the Ukraine? Now, uh,
They need to. I agree with you.
if I was running the United States at the present time, I would try to bring this war to a conclusion. But I would tell Putin and I would tell Zelensky, you know, I don't want to see it continue. I want you two to get together, hammer out some kind of truce. Let's see how long it can last. But I will continue to fund the Ukrainian cause, but I want very thorough auditing of the books of everything we send you, money we send you, munitions we send you, all of that stuff. So we'll stay with you, and I will do everything possible to get NATO to stay in there also, because we have to stop Vladimir Putin from moving any further. That's what
Yeah.
I would do. I don't know if Trump has the courage to do that. I don't know if he wants to do that.
I don't think Trump is going to come down on Russia because he probably wants his Trump Tower rebuilt in Moscow, the one that he was planning to build over there. He probably has plans to do that by sucking up to Putin. I think he's looking at his future at this point, and he doesn't care, what really is going to happen to this country. And like I said, I mean, people say, "Oh, well, you elected him." No, I didn't elect him. I actually voted for Jill Stein because I felt that she was the only honest candidate who could run. And I felt that Harris and Biden had really destroyed this country. But now it looks like Trump, instead of doing what needs to be done, I think he's really undermining our country. We look like a circus to the rest of the world. And I think it's something that we'll see come back to us in a bad way. It worries me, that these dictators survive, and our polarized politics just, is the only thing that survives instead of good leadership. It's very troublesome.
Yes, it is. Absolutely. I feel very badly about the entire situation. Never did I believe that the United States of America would be in this shape.
Yeah, and by the way, I don't totally blame Trump. I blame the Democrats for not stepping up to the plate. You remember when Biden was elected, he said we were going to bring the country together. He never tried to do
No,
that.
not at all.
No, nobody has tried. And I think the news media in this country is a major, factor in fueling this divide that allows craziness to take place. And it's troubling that our country is being run by executive order.
Yes.
He controls the Senate and the Congress, and yet he's doing everything by executive order. What does that tell you? That Congress and the Senate, even though it's controlled by Republicans, don't really support everything that he's doing. And there might be some problems.
But they don't have the courage to stand up to him. Not one of them.
That's true. Although, remember what we talked about at past shows. If we look back at the Trump administration during the first 4 years, it was a revolving door of people that were great. Marco Rubio is here. How long is Marco Rubio going to last? I don't know. Till the first time that Trump calls him a name again, tells him to go back to Cuba, where his family's from. Who knows what this guy's going to do? He's mercurial. And, on the one hand, it makes for great stories. On the other hand, it creates a real concern. I may have to go back and do what my dad had thought about one day. They were going to build a bomb shelter under our house.
Oh, is that right?
And now I'm thinking, maybe I should follow through with those plans because the world is not looking very safe today. It's gotten worse, not because of just one person, but the whole situation here in the United States is worrisome.
Well, I don't know. Is there anything else that's be said about the Ukraine and Russia and Putin and Zelensky? I don't think so.
It'll be interesting to see. I know that Zelensky protested when he heard that it was going to be Putin and Trump and in Saudi Arabia.
Well, I certainly would protest.
Yeah, I mean, he should be at the table, right? And in fact, he should have been mentioned in the press conference that Trump had. But that sends a bad signal. It says that Trump isn't thinking this through. And I don't know if he's distracted. He's getting what he wants with all his appointments. Robert F. Kennedy is Health and Human Services. I tend to like Robert F. Kennedy. I think you do too. We don't agree with everything, but there's no 100%, right?
That's right, absolutely. Yeah, we'll see what Kennedy can do. I mean, he has a lot of good ideas. Hopefully, he'll be able to implement those good ideas and make America healthier.
Yeah, and I'm worried about the Middle East because Trump's position on Gaza has really angered and upset the Arab world. But you saw how he kind of abused Jordan's King Abdullah. King
Yes,
Abdullah looked like he was taken to the woodshed and he
yes.
just couldn't protest. He was like a little kid, almost ashamed. He was bullied by Trump. And I'm thinking, wow, I guess being the bull in a meeting does have its advantages, but in the long term, does it end up doing the right thing? I don't think so.
That's not how you win friends and influence people. That's for sure. And I think the King of Jordan has been very, very helpful to us over the course of
Yes,
many
he
years.
has.
Yes.
He should have been treated a little bit better. All right. Well, anyway, listen, let's hope that there's a world next week when we do our next episode of Two Guys on Politics, Bill. I'm getting a little worried. We may have to go to a NATO nation if we're going to have free speech around here. I don't know. I'm Ray Hanania.
I'm Bill Lipinski, and this is Two Guys on Politics, and we'll see you next week.
All right, everybody. Thank you.